Battleground Makiivka, the Ukrainian Army's intense assault. In the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, a major campaign has been launched that seriously blows Russia. The conflict in Makiivka has caused a domino effect, where certain events could lead to failure. The Ukrainian counteroffensive, which weakened Russia's army, particularly the Wagner Group, is one of the major events that contributed to this domino effect. After losing much of its power, the Wagner Group faced additional instability due to a coup plot. The Ukrainian army gained a huge advantage by using this crisis as a chance to launch numerous successful attacks on the occupied territory of Russia. According to the latest developments, the Ukrainian military has launched an offensive to gain control. This has caused heavy losses for Russian troops on the entire front. Ukraine is making life difficult for Russian troops in the occupied territories. Makiivka has been experiencing a violent conflict in recent days marked by explosions. In Donetsk, Ukrainian artillery's destruction of Russian armored vehicles is constant. The sound of explosions in the area echoed for a full day as Ukrainian artillery units continued their attack on Makiivka. Russian sources are yet to issue any statements. If the attacks continue at this intensity, many Russian installations in the area will likely be destroyed. The battlefield has been very active in recent days. On the one hand, there have been counterattacks by the Ukrainian army, and on the opposite hand, local sources claim that the Russian troops have suffered significant losses. We cannot confirm the reports, but it has been reported that Russia is using new censorship techniques against the media. After these successive losses, the occupied Ukrainian territory is now a battleground with Russian troops. As a response, the Ukrainian army intensified its counteroffensive by targeting Russian positions located behind the front line. Moreover, the Ukrainian army is expanding its stock to support these operations. The elimination of Wagner Group's leader Prigozhin has led to new consequences for the Russian coup attempt. Many important documents were seized during the raid of the Wagner Group's offices. According to information gathered from Russian sources in recent weeks, these documents allegedly hold crucial information on war crimes Russia and the Wagner Group committed in Ukraine. The impact of Ukrainian attacks on Russia's armored vehicles will ultimately depend on the tactical outcome of those attacks and the Russian response. The increased delivery of advanced weapons to Ukraine, such as Turkish howitzers, indicates an increase in the capabilities of the Ukrainian military. The fact that the Russian and Ukrainian conflict is evolving and the successful seizure of documents relating to war crimes indicates a new dynamic. Quote, Putin's war strategies are taking a heavy price, and the Russian army and Russia, in general, are heading towards darker times than under Stalin. For Russian soldiers, the Ukrainian territory has become the eastern front of the Second World War, particularly in December. The Russian army has an excessively aggressive war strategy. This has caused the conflict to spread into Russian cities. As the Russians recovered, they began to support the conflict based on the statements of their leaders and the propaganda produced by state-controlled television. The support for President Putin increased significantly during this period. The Russian public entered the third stage with the partial mobilization of Putin in the autumn of last year. Their perspective on the Ukraine conflict and Putin started to change. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, a mass exodus occurred. Estimates suggest that 900,000 Russian citizens and residents fled the country. 300,000 left by mid-March, 500,000 at the end of August, and an additional 400,000 after October. Departures from Russia stopped. Anti-war demonstrations in the country increased the Kremlin's decision-making and the fear of escalation. In 2023, Russia is undergoing an important mobilization process, leading to the mass exodus of thousands of Russian citizens. This departure was a direct result of the Kremlin implementing a new mobilization act, which caused widespread anxiety in the population. By 2023, it is estimated that over 1.5 million Russians will have left their country. Russian citizens are now unable to object to conscription decisions. Before this reform, those who disobey military orders faced up to 10 years in prison. Penalties, in this case, remain severe. Kremlin officials and legislators have publicly stated that this law is a response to challenges they faced when implementing Putin's partial mobilization decree, which required 300,000 soldiers to fight in Ukraine in the fall of last year. Putin launched a covert mobilization to replenish the losses in the Russian army, while providing reinforcements for the front lines. This decision also forced hundreds of thousands to flee Russia to avoid compulsory military service. Many anti-war Russians have avoided military service by changing addresses or claiming they didn't receive the draft notification. Russian borders are shifting, just as they did during the initial mobilization. The constant occurrence of violent escapes in Russia is the reason for this shift. Escapes have increased not only within Russia, but also outside of its borders. Despite the Kremlin administration's claim that the current situation is unrelated to mobilization, there is no doubt that mobilization in Russia is taking place. The Russian authorities are aware of the disapproval of last year's mobilization. The shortage of supplies for the military and the insufficient training for the conflict sparked protests and objections on a nationwide scale. Currently, the Russian government's top priority is to recruit more people for the Russian armed forces, which has resulted in a greater emphasis on quantity than quality. However, this approach has some drawbacks because it can compromise the military's effectiveness. The Russians may lose the war because they will not be willing to serve in Ukraine for the duration of the conflict. This situation significantly increases the casualties that the Russian army suffers. Despite these obstacles, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that it would increase the number of soldiers in the army to 1.5 million. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced its intention to increase the total number of personnel in the army by 30%, reaching 1.5 million. Many respected military experts do not believe Vladimir Putin can achieve this goal. In Russia, part-time workers have risen by 7.3% to reach 450,000. In Russia, 15% are part-time employees at large and medium businesses. If we had yet to notice it, the consequences of the Ukraine situation make it impossible for Russians to develop long-term strategies for their business. In the event of a forced mobilization of the entire population or extremely unfavorable conditions, the rise in part-time employment in Russia will have a more detrimental and significant effect on the country. In Russia, disguised unemployment has reached an unprecedented level. The Russian government will face the greatest challenges in February and January. Vladimir Putin provided unlimited financial resources to the Russian military and authorized the addition of 350,000 personnel. The Russian population will be devastated by this, and millions will march on the Kremlin to try and break its doors. The number of Russians who choose to vacation on the Mediterranean coast of Turkey is also increasing. Antalya, in particular, has historically seen a decline. A total of 3.3 million people will be affected by the current situation. What will happen next? What factors led Makiivka to become a major battleground in the Ukrainian conflict? Nobody knows because you can expect anything from both sides during the war. So, stay with us as we regularly bring you authentic news from the battleground.